Hi, this is Rick McGill. We're now going to make a simple hard cheese. What I like about this recipe is that you will have a hard cheese ready to eat faster than most recipes you'll experience, probably in 1 to 2 weeks. The other good part about the recipe is many of the techniques I will show are techniques you find in any hard cheese. So once you master this recipe, you'll be able to branch out and make any type of hard cheese you want. The ingredients for this hard cheese are very straightforward. You'll need a gallon of milk, a packet of culture. I like to use the mesophilic culture that I get from cheesemaking.com. It's C101. You're also going to need a half teaspoon of rennet diluted in a 1/4 cup of water. And because I'm using pasteurized milk, I'm going to opt to use some calcium chloride. I use a 1/4 cup of calcium chloride diluted in 1/4 cup of water. Just a quick word on calcium chloride. Calcium chloride is an additive, and I use it whenever I'm using pasteurized milk for anything other than mozzarella or provolone. The calcium chloride replenishes some of the calcium that the milk loses during pasteurization. By doing this, I help ensure that I have a stronger curd, and it improves my chance of having a successful batch. However, if you're using a pasteurized milk, you may want to try it first without the calcium chloride additive. If it works, then you're fine to go. If it doesn't, or you're not happy with the yield, you might want to start adding a little bit of calcium chloride. You always add calcium chloride prior to adding any culture or rennet. So I typically will add it as I start the initial warming of any milk I'm using. Okay, because I am using a pasteurized milk, I need to incorporate the calcium chloride. So I'm going to turn the heat on under the milk to the lowest temperature setting possible, and while the milk just starts to heat, I'm going to incorporate the calcium chloride. It's important to do this at this stage because you want to add calcium chloride prior to adding any type of culture and also any rennet. This allows the calcium chloride to completely incorporate into the milk and will give you a much stronger curd and a higher probability of having a successful batch when you complete your milk. As your milk reaches 86 degrees, you're going to want to add your culture, and this is the mesophilic culture. And because it's a dry culture, you're going to want to sprinkle it on top and let it sit for 2 minutes before stirring it in. At the end of the 2 minutes, you stir your milk completely so that you fully incorporate your culture. Then you're going to want to cover it, and you're going to want to let this sit for an hour before your next step. However, just to keep this warm, I'm going to put it in a very shallow water bath, where the water is coming up to the, just up maybe at most a 1/4 of the way on the pot. And we'll let this sit for an hour like this until our very next step. It's been an hour, so it's now time to add the rennet. Now, one thing that's very good to do before you add rennet in any situation is to do a quick stir. You really want to be sure that if the milk has been sitting for a while, that there's been no separation of the milk. This is particularly important if you're using either raw milk or a non-homogenized pasteurized milk. But it's a good practice to get into. And then just let the milk quiet down. And now what we're going to do is add our rennet. And we're going to add half a teaspoon of rennet diluted into 1/4 cup of water. And we're going to keep the milk in the water bath. I'm not going to replenish the water, but we'll keep the milk in the water bath during the entire next step. So to add the rennet, what you do is disperse it slowly over your spoon and then stir for no more than 30 seconds very gently. All you're trying to do is just ensure that the rennet has gone throughout the entire mixture. And if you happen to see thickening happening while you're stirring, stop immediately. But you're going to stir it like this. That's been about 30 seconds. Cover it. And now you're going to let it sit for another hour before the next step. It's been an hour since we've added the rennet, so we're now going to cut the curd. And to do the cut, we will do initially a grid cut, which is where we make right-angled curd cuts so the curd is in about 1-inch segments. So to do that, you really take your knife, put it down into the curd, and slice towards you. And your initial slices are done in a parallel fashion. And then you just go at a right angle. And once again, you're trying to make the curd about an inch by an inch. And cut it accordingly. Now the curd, after it's cut, is pretty delicate. And so we're going to let this curd sit another 5, maybe even 10 minutes before we do anything else. So after you do this cut, cover your curd and wait another 5 minutes. When you're cutting the curd, what you're doing is increasing the surface area of the curd. This allows the whey to exit the curd, which is an important curing process and preparation process for your cheese. However, you have to make sure you don't overwork the curd. When it is initially cut, it's still quite fragile. So waiting some time to make sure that the curd forms and firms up after the cut is important. Also, I will wait to stir the curd until probably about 30 minutes into the heating phase. Because once again, I want to be sure the curd is forming and is solid, and I don't want to damage it by moving it around too much. The curd is now set for 5 minutes. So what I'm going to do first is replenish the hot water, which I've already done. And I'm going to put it in so it's about halfway up the pot. Now what I need to do is a series of diagonal cuts just to increase the amount of surface area more with the curd. And to do that, all you do is just take your knife and progressively cut down. Now be certain that you don't overcut. You don't want to mush them into small bits, but you just want to increase the area of the curd a little bit more. Now that I've done that, the curd is ready to cook. For this recipe, to cook the curd, I want to get the whey above 100 degrees. So to do that, as I said earlier, I replenish the water bath so it's halfway up the pot. I cover the pot, and now what I'm going to do is add a little bit of water from the tea kettle that's been heating on the back. And in about 10 minutes, I would suggest you test the whey. Put your thermometer in the whey, not in the curd, and just make sure that the whey's up over 100 degrees. So as you'll see, I'm going to add the water. And I'll come back and check in about 10 minutes. But we're going to let the curd cook at this temperature for about 2 hours. And we'll stir it at about every 30 minutes. Getting the temperature of the whey above 100 ensures you have a very firm cheese. If you want your hard cheese to have a little more moisture, be a little softer, you would heat the whey up to about 95 degrees. It's important that you measure the temperature of the whey and not of the curd. That's the temperature that will drive the cooking of the curd and let you know if you're cooking it at too high or too low of a temperature. The curd is now set for 2 hours. So we're going to harvest the curd using a strainer that has been lined with cheesecloth. And that will allow us to get ready to do the next step after we harvest the curd, which is to herb it. So now that we're getting ready to harvest the curd, I will take the curd out of the water bath, and in its place, I'm going to actually use my colander, which is lined, as I said, with cheesecloth. And this is really to help you catch curd that so it won't go through, as well as it makes cleanup a lot easier if you line your colander with the cheesecloth. And what you're going to want to do is first pour off as much excess whey as you can without getting the letting the curd escape. And then just very gingerly get the curd out. And so you can see the chunks of curd as they have formed. What we have to do now is we have to herb and spice the curd, and then once we do that, we'll need to press it. Before I add the salt and the herbing to the curd, I like to be sure that I get as much of the whey sort of residual out of it. I don't press it, but if you actually take your cheesecloth and kind of roll the curd like this, most of the excess whey that's kind of on top of the curd will disappear. And so do this, and then let the curd sit for about 15 minutes before you do before you add your salt or your herbs to it. And after 15 minutes, we will begin that process. Now that the curd is set about 15 minutes, I'm going to transfer it to the bowl and add salt and herbing to it. What I'm going to do is add 1 teaspoon of cheese salt and 1 packet of Sherry's Gourmet Dips, and this time I'm going to use garlic. The reason I like to use this series of dips is it's made without any salt added to it, and it also incorporates nicely into the amount of cheese produced by 1 gallon of milk. To press the cheese, you're going to want to have some device that you can line with cheesecloth that's open at the top and the bottom, and preferably there are some holes along the side as well to let the excess whey come out. I actually bought this at a cheese making shop, but frankly you could make your own using PVC piping, which you get at your local Lowe's or Home Depot. But basically what you want to do is take the device and line it with your cheesecloth. And I'm using the cheesecloth that I had previously used to when I was draining the cheese curd in my strainer, because I'm cheap and I don't want to let anything go to waste. But you just make sure that it's just lined completely. And now what you're going to do is just basically ladle your curd into your form. And you just ladle it as you have it here. Notice that, I've herbed my curd completely. And you're going to want to fill up your form with the curd. Just gently press a little bit to make sure you have enough room for all of your curd to fit in. And as I did there, I was able to catch a little bit here at the side because I don't want to lose any yield. Because the important part in a hard cheese is the pressing. And you're going to want to basically be set up so that you can press. And this also involves a little bit of ingenuity, because you need to find not only the right thing to line to press, but the right types of weights to put on it. Then once you have done that, you merely fold your cheesecloth over the top, and then you need to locate a weight. And what I like to do is try to do a 2-fold item. I have a can of tuna or crab meat, which I can basically put at the top, and that gives me a firm base. And then I try to find a device, either like a jar that I can use, or another alternative is I have a box that's about 5 pounds in total weight. And this actually is good because it gives a nice, even weighting that I can put on the cheese. So once you get that situated and balanced, as I'm doing right now, you're all set to go. Because you want to have about 5 pounds of weight on your cheese. And this weighting is going to last probably about, I typically try to press about 12 to 15 hours. So at this point, you're pressing and you'll wait another 12 to 15 hours before your next step. Okay, we're back. It's only been a couple of minutes because I decided that I needed a different way to press my cheese. What you want to do is make sure that your container that's going into the mold is just barely smaller than the mold. And I was able to find a popcorn container which satisfied that, and then able to put another popcorn container filled with water on top of it. In total, I have about 6 pounds that will press. One suggestion is if you're making your own mold, find what you're going to actually use as the center weight, and then pick a mold that just barely fits around it. That way you'll basically have a good, effective way of pressing your curd. It's now 15 hours later, and one of the things I like to do during the pressing process is to gradually increase the weight. So you'll see what I ended up with my final weighting. This was about 10 pounds of weight that was applied onto the cheese. But now all we have to do in working with the cheese at this point is to remove it from the mold. And you'll see what it looks like. All I have to do now is unwrap the cheese, sprinkle cheese salt around the outside of it, rewrap it in cheesecloth, and then let it sit in the refrigerator for 2 weeks. And during that time, I replace the cheesecloth as it gets wet with a dry cheesecloth. At that point in time, it's ready to eat. So I hope you enjoy.